What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are looking at Day 1 decks. These are decks that were played in tournaments today. Decks that were made from Shine and Revelry, the brand new standard format for Play Limitless TCG or in Pokemon Pocket in general. So as you may know, and if you don't, I'll explain it right now. Play Limitless TCG is where the majority of tournaments happen for Pokemon Pocket, and on here every single time a new set is released, a new standard format is considered based on the new pack that was released. And so of course that is Shine and Revelry. Today they had a couple of tournaments, as it did release very early in the morning today. My time, I believe it was 2 a.m. and there have already been tournaments and new decks coming out of this. New decks using new cards and new decks, old decks, actually, if you think of it, playing some new versions of those decks. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at two of the tournaments and talk about some of the decks that were very successful. So the first one we're going to look at is the Pocket Tour Tournament number 16. And as you can see, Giratina and Darkrai already won a tournament. And then in the other tournament we're going to look at, it also got second place, Giratina and Darkrai. So let's look at that deck first. This one here that went 9-1 is 2 Darkrai, 2 Druddigon, 2 Giratina, 2 Leaf, 2 Professor's Research, 2 Red, 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina, 1 Team Rocket Grunt, 2 Pokeball, 2 Giant Cape, and 1 Rocky Helmet. This deck is super duper cool, and a lot of people theorize this deck would be pretty decent, and it's due to the fact that you could basically, Giratina EX is very similar to Magneton / Magnezone, except that it's a basic that can basically ramp onto itself. So you're basically building up 2 Pokemon at the exact same time. So what you do is you sit behind Druddigon as your wall, your tank that will sit in the active, and every time you put a Dark Energy on Darkrai EX, you get 20 free damage. And then anytime somebody attacks into your Druddigon, you get more free damage. If you have a Rocky Helmet, it's even more. So while you're putting energy on your Darkrai to build it up, you're just getting a bunch of free damage, whilst you also build your Giratina up with its Broken Space Bellow. Now, of course, when you use it, your turn ends, but it doesn't really matter, because if you do a energy on Darkrai, get the free damage, do everything else you want to do in the turn, and then use it, you're going to be ending your turn anyway. So by the time you get your Darkrai fully loaded up, not only do you have a fully loaded up Darkrai who's already done 60 damage, plus all the additional damage your Druddigon may have gotten, or your Rocky Helmets, but your Giratina is now at 3 energy as well, which means once your Darkrai actually comes into attack, you already have a backup attacker, and you no longer have to use Broken Space Bellow, so you can just manually attach onto the Giratina at that point. It basically completely replaces Magnezone, which is really good in Pocket right now, because you don't want to be playing 6 Pokemon just to get that kind of effect. Now you have a basic in Giratina EX that can basically do the same thing and actually attack for more and has much higher HP. So the version of the deck that got second place is this one, which is basically the same deck, except you trade out 1 Druddigon for 1 Rotom. I guess this is because they wanted to be able to snipe in the early game and possibly Cyrus something out, I guess. I'm not 100% sure. You're also not playing Arceus, so it's not like you get free retreat, but we do see this deck already being extremely successful. The Darkrai Magnezone deck completely ran the meta when it was the Space-Time Smackdown meta. Once Triumphant Light came out, Arceus kind of took over. It seems like this deck going forward may very well be extremely strong. Now, with that being said, what I do think is, I'm going to actually talk a little bit about this later, but I do think Pokemon like Hitmonlee are going to get a rise in play rate, as well as potentially something like Zebstrika, basically cards that could snipe. And I'll get into it in a little bit later, but one of the reasons is a deck like this that plays Druddigon, where you don't want to attack into it, but then you can try to snipe over it. But I'll also get into a lot more reasons why. Actually, we'll just do it right now, and it's because of this deck here that got first place in a tournament this week. It was the new pack faster than the light tournament. It went 11-1-1, and it's the Gyarados Origin Form Palkia deck. It's basically 2 Gyarados line, 2 Manaphy, and 1 Origin Form Palkia. 2 Professor's Research, 2 Misty, 2 Irida, 1 Sabrina, 1 Red, 2 Pokeball, 2 Rocky Helmet, and 1 Communication. So, why is Gyarados all of a sudden becoming great again? Because when it first came out in Mythical Island, it was the brand new big bad on the play rate in tournaments. And as you can see, it's not a one-off. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the top cut in just that tournament, and then in this tournament there was one in the top cut, but then a bunch of other ones that went 4 and 2, 4 and 2, 4 and 2. So this deck is also doing very good right now, and the reason being, honestly, is for a couple of things. The first being red. Now that we have red, Gyarados isn't just doing 140 damage, it's doing 160. And because it has 180 HP, it's tremendous for being able to knock something out, basically. Take a shot and then knock something else out again. So when this first came out, it basically like replaced Charizard EX in a way of being able to be that Pokemon that can one-shot everything and not worry about getting knocked out on the following turn. Very similar in this sense. Not only that, but if people are playing the new Pikachu, which does 150 HP, or damage to a Pokemon, and hits for weakness against Gyarados, Gyarados still takes the shot. So that is pretty big. And then not only that, but when you put Rocky Helmets on either your Manaphy, your Origin Form, or your Gyarados, you're also just increasing those chances of getting those breakpoints with your Gyarados EX. So Gyarados EX, I'm surprised we don't see 2 red in this, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think we need a communication necessarily, and I'm also surprised we're playing Sabrina instead of Cyrus, kind of because we're playing Rocky Helmets. You would think that maybe we would want the Cyrus, but either way, this deck went 11-1, and it's getting very good. And now the other reason why I think this deck is doing very good right now is because of the fact nobody's really playing Pokemon that snipe the bench anymore. You would think that fighting decks are still playing Hitmonlee, but let's just take a look from just these 2 tournaments alone. And I could have pulled up older decks from older tournaments, but there's no reason to because I look at tournaments all the time. Look at this, 3 different decks, all Rampardos Lucario decks, and not a single one of them is playing a Hitmonlee. This deck very often now does not play Hitmonlee. The only decks that are really playing Hitmonlee right now are the Gallade decks, and these decks are pretty decent, but they're very few and far between in the sense that their meta share is a lot lower than the Rampardos Lucario deck. So if we're not seeing a lot of Hitmonlee, and this is really the only sniper in the entire game right now, other than the Psychic Rotom, however, it only snipes for 20, then the Magikarp has space to thrive and has time to evolve into the Gyarados EX. But I could almost guarantee you, starting tomorrow, pretty much starting tomorrow, if not today, if there are more tournaments that are going to start today, if people are tracking this, they will start to put Hitmonlee back into their decks. In fact, if Pikachu EX, the new one, starts to become pretty decent, I guarantee we might even start to see Zebstrika come back into the meta a little bit in electric decks or lightning decks, because we are going to want to stop that Magikarp from evolving into Gyarados. So yes, maybe I was wrong. Maybe communications does need to be in this deck so that you can guarantee you get the Gyarados as early as possible into your hand to evolve into that Gyarados from the Magikarp. But let's look at a couple of other decks that made it into top cuts and pretty cool and interesting builds. We already looked at this. This was the second place Giratina and Darkrai deck, but then we have a Beedrill Executor deck. So this deck, I wanted to make a Leafeon version of this deck instead of an Executor version of this deck, but this one's probably just as good, if not better. First of all, your Executor could tank while you try to get into your Beedrill. Your Leafeon could technically do that too. If you're playing things like Cape, there might not be room for it. But yes, of course, you're going to be playing 2 Team Rocket Grunt if you're going to be playing a Beedrill EX, because you are trying to control the energy. Now, this deck actually did pretty decent. It made it into a top cut, but I do not think this deck is going to do tremendously well. First of all, by the time you get into Beedrill, it might not matter if you discard an energy from your opponent's Pokemon, especially since there's so much ramp in the game already. Let's forget about the decks we just talked about. Let's just talk about the cards. Manaphy, Dialga, Giratina, Magnezone, Moltres, and Leafeon. These are all cards that could ramp, and they're all cards that are played in a lot of meta decks, right? So if we're ramping like crazy, does it really matter if Beedrill is doing that? Now, the one that might come in handy a lot more than Beedrill is Team Rocket Grunt, and I've already seen it in a couple of deck lists, and I think it makes sense, but I'm not so sure if it will continue to be played, because again, if, like, we just looked at this deck, right? If we already have 2 Pokemon completely set up, is Team Rocket Grunt going to really change the tempo of the game back into your favor? It could, maybe, I'm not so sure. But I also want to look at this deck here, which is Giratina and Magnezone. Okay, so this deck was also played in the tournament. This also builds 2 Pokemon at a time. If you remove the Druddigons, and I've seen people do this already, content creators, if you remove those Druddigon and you play something like a Darkrai, then not only are you manually building up a Darkrai, but you're automatically building a Magnezone and automatically building a Giratina. So if you have 3 Pokemon online all at the same time, the Team Rocket Grunt isn't going to do a lot. So I'm not so sure if this deck will continue to be very good, or if it'll start to just go down and maybe people just want to test it out the first week or whatever. But it might still be better than I think. First of all, 160 on the Executor, 170 on the Beedrill. You're playing Ericas, but you're not really playing any other heals. You're not playing a Shaman. You're not playing potions. You're not obviously not going to be playing water energy, so you're not going to be playing Narita. So I'm not so sure, but I do like the 1 Iona and the 1 Pokemon Communications. I do agree, if you're going to be playing an Iona, it's most likely to get into a stage 2 Pokemon that you're trying to evolve into. And if that is the case, you should also be playing it alongside a Communication, so you have 2 shots of getting whatever you want. And not only that, but if you play a Communications before you play the Iono, you actually don't lose any cards in your hand. You actually just replace it, but then you discard the Communication to the graveyard, so you actually thin your deck so that when you do play the Iono, you have a better shot of getting into whatever you want to get into. But then let's look at the next deck, and it's the Magnezone Pachirisu Pikachu EX deck. This deck is basically made to try, I guess, to fill up. Actually, not even, because they're not playing Dawn, which is very surprising. They're only playing 1 Pikachu EX, which I'm kind of surprised about, and they're not playing any Dawn, which is kind of weird, because if you play Pachirisu and you ramp onto Pikachu, and then you ramp onto Magneton, you can literally retreat even without a X speed your Pachirisu, bring it into your Pikachu, manually attach, and then don the energy from Magneton. Or you can just skip Magneton altogether, X speed your Pachirisu out, don the energy onto Pikachu, and manually attach for the final third energy on your second turn of attack, and attack for 150. Now, if you do that, of course, you can't play a red, so maybe that's what this player wanted to do. But still, only 1 Pikachu EX and no Dawn felt very odd to me. And I'm not so sure. Like, honestly, if I built this deck personally, I would probably play, first of all, 2 Pikachu, at least 1 Dawn, if not 2. And I would probably play only 1 Magnezone, not 2. But honestly, I think this deck would be just fine without the Magnezone altogether, and just go for the Pachirisu Pikachu, and then maybe something else, maybe something like a Zebstrika in the future if Gyarados continues to do super duper well. Was there any other decks? I think there were. No, there was not. So, but we can just go down the list really quick if we want to here and look at a couple of other decks. There was a ton. Look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 5 Giratina in the top cut. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Gyarados in the top cut as well. So these two new decks are going to be a big part of the meta going forward, I think. And so because this is the first day, you will continue to see it change a little bit going forward based on the decks that are doing really well. Like I said, I guarantee you're going to start seeing Hitmonlee in every single fighting deck now. And if Lightning gets if it actually starts to be really good again, you're definitely going to see Zeb strike out 100% to make sure you get into those Magikarp. And if you just look at the meta share of decks, Giratina and Gyarados is very small. But if we actually go back to the beginning here, if we go on tournaments, if we go completed, and then we look at just Pokemon Pocket, let me do this really quickly. Apply. Today completed. Let's look. That was the one. Open this one. Metagame. The top 3 decks, obviously Dialga Arceus, the top meta share with 17 decks, 11 of Giratina and Darkrai, and 9 of Gyarados. If we go back and we go to ongoing let's filter this again, Pocket, apply, ongoing, and then we go to this big one, 463 people. We go metagame. 64 Dialga Arceus, of course, is still the best deck from the last format, so a lot of people are still going to be playing it. But Giratina, Darkrai, 44% meta share, or 9.5% meta share, and a 7.5% meta share for the Gyarados Manaphy. And, of course, Gallade Hitmonlee up to a 6.48, which is very on par with Rampardos. And let's open the Rampardos decks, and let's just try to take a little look here if Hitmonlee is back into these decks or not. This one is not. No Hitmonlee there. Third deck. No Hitmonlee here. And no Hitmonlee here. So the top 4 or 5 decks of the Rampardos Lucario decks are not playing Hitmonchan. But the Hitmonlee Gallade decks are playing 2 Hitmonlee. So those decks might actually start to do a lot better. And as you can see, 57.459% win rate. That could be for a couple of reasons. That could be Hitmonlee sniping the Gyarados, or it could be Gallade attacking Hitmonlee sniping the Magikarp and Gallade destroying the Gyarados. So it's super good matchup. Gallade, Hitmonlee is a super good matchup to play against the Gyarados decks right now. But anyways, with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to keep track of this next Monday when I do my top 10 decks of the week. It won't be a full week, obviously, because it just dropped today, but I'll look over the entire weekend worth of tournaments and do another report. Thanks so much. And as always, keep cooking.